As a curious bystander who's long appreciated the Monster Hunter series from a safe distance, and like so many, finally decided to join the hunt in earnest, charge blade in hand with the release of Monster Hunter World, that's right, I'm a 5th fleeter and proud of it, goddammit. I was as eager as any newly minted hunter could be to see how Capcom would continue to evolve their beastly franchise, building on the enormous successes of World and its follow-up Monster Hunter Rise, the latter of which I'm not ashamed to admit I absolutely adore, despite the very vocal contentious opinions of some longtime fans. Listen, Rise is just that hyperactive and chaotic younger sibling who likes to do somersaults off the bed when they've had too much sugar and occasionally kicks you in the nuts. You love them, you hate them, in the end, they're family. But as I was saying, I was excited to see how Capcom would continue to push the envelope with the next mainline entry, and leverage the power of current-gen systems to elevate this much-beloved series to new heights from both a gameplay and a visual standpoint with Wilds. Because like the most dedicated and meticulous of chefs, they've been tweaking, refining, and enhancing this recipe for 20 long years in the hopes of enticing newcomers to a series that has long been all the rage in the land of the rising sun since its humble beginnings, but remained mostly an acquired taste in the West, with a smaller yet no less dedicated community, unto a world that came roaring out of the gate demanding to be noticed, and noticed it was. Monster Hunter World represented a watershed moment for the long-running franchise, with Capcom flexing all of its AAA muscle, leveraging decades of prior experience, and dumping a Zoro Magdaro-sized mountain of yen to create the most fully realized Monster Hunter entry to date, while simultaneously being the most approachable for timid newbies like myself, which was one heck of a juggling act, and one that I think most would agree they managed to pull off quite spectacularly if its impressive sales numbers and glowing review scores are any indication. Evolving and changing any long-running franchise can be a challenging, if not perilous, proposition. On the one hand, if a series doesn't toy with new ideas, it can risk becoming stale and stagnating. But on the other, if it changes too much, it can end up losing its identity along with its core fanbase. Look no further than Capcom's other established, wildly successful series, Resident Evil, for proof of this conundrum. While Resi undoubtedly went through some boulder-sized growing pains as it moved away from its survival horror roots into the realm of B-level action romp, much to the dismay of many longtime fans, myself included, I also recognize that it was perhaps a necessary evil for the franchise's long-term survival and continued growth for Capcom to switch up the formula and explore new ideas. Even if that left most of us longing for the classic survival horror gameplay of the past by the time Resi 6 had us motorcycle jumping over helicopters and outrunning avalanches of exploding cars. Yearning makes the heart grow fonder and all that. But despite its missteps, Resi is still going strong today, and maybe even stronger than ever because it took those shots. Even if it missed the mark once or twice, it allowed the series to renew itself and win back old fans as well as bring in new ones. It also doesn't hurt that Capcom cleverly found a perfect middle ground that keeps crusty nostalgia hounds like me happy with the remakes, while also allowing the series to continue to evolve with fresh concepts and gameplay styles like the recent first-person games. It seems we can have our brains and eat them too, after all. Monster Hunter, on the other hand, hasn't quite undergone the radical mutations that Resi has throughout its lifetime. The changes here have been more deliberate and incremental, avoiding drastic reinventions of the series' core gameplay loop and mechanics from game to game, opting more for refinements and iteration. The franchise hasn't completely shied away from experimenting with bold new ideas, however. Monster Hunter Tri and 3 Ultimate famously or infamously introduced underwater hunts into the series, which honestly look cool as hell to me as someone who's never played those games. However, it seems most didn't care for it, and the concept was abandoned altogether in subsequent titles. More recently, Monster Hunter Rise introduced several radical tweaks to the formula, with the wirebug mechanic, palamutes, wyvern riding, and rampage quests to name a few, resulting in the most dynamic traversal and acrobatic fights the series has ever seen. Yet it left some longtime fans of the opinion that these changes came at the expense of that famed Monster Hunter difficulty. A valid critique, if one that I believe was ultimately addressed with the Sunbreak expansion, but individual mileage will vary. Then there's the endearing story spin-offs, which are more akin to traditional JRPGs, with their turn-based battles, monster collecting, and greater emphasis on narrative. And I really hope Wilds is taking a page from stories and investing just a bit more into its, story. Albeit with a slightly more mature tone, as I love a good yarn with a healthy dose of world building, charming characters, and colorful lore that I can really sink my teeth into and daydream about. For the most part though, Monster Hunter has remained true to its identity for the better part of 2 decades now. Save for quality of life improvements, the introduction of new weapons, locations, and of course, monsters throughout the years, the core gameplay loop and feel, one could argue, has remained mostly untouched. This adherence to tradition has been a point of pride for many veterans in the hunting community, but it has also kept many, like myself, at arm's length from the series for quite some time for one reason or another. As a spry young lad of only 16 when Monster Hunter made its debut on the PS2, I've always been aware of the series' existence through my many years of gaming. Growing up as obsessed with all things dinosaurs as I was, thanks largely to receiving a VHS of Steven Spielberg's sci-fi adventure masterpiece Jurassic Park at the tender age of 7, you'd think I would have been all over a video game series about going toe-to-toe with deadly prehistoric creatures. And I was. It was called Dino Crisis. But for one reason or another, mostly because the series remained an elusive beast in the West for quite some time, Monster Hunter passed me by until years later when I randomly checked out a demo for one of the 3DS releases at a local Best Buy, and it wasn't love at first sight. Looking back on it now, I can't recall exactly what it was about that demo that initially turned me off from the series. It might have been my struggle to fully grasp Monster Hunter's more nuanced and weighty approach to combat and weapon handling within a limited demo that made me wary. Having cut my teeth on fast-paced action games like Shinobi, God of War, and Capcom's own Devil May Cry, where juggling screens full of enemies with crazy combos often felt effortless, Monster Hunter offered no such concessions, and its combat would have felt slow and clunky to me back then, with its tanky character movements and drawn-out attack animations that had to be precisely timed and executed, lest you found yourself hitting nothing but air and getting steamrolled in return. Hardware limitations also meant you spent a significant amount of time staring at loading screens before, during, and after hunts, which made the world seem more like a series of disconnected hubs and boss arenas rather than natural environments you could freely explore and get lost in. Moreover, the 3DS's limited button layout and small screen would have further compounded these issues, making it even more cumbersome to navigate the countless menu screens the series is known for. It was likely a combination of all these things, honestly, that ended up dropping an extra-large steaming dung pod on my initial hands-on experience with the series and sent me running for the hills, shutting the doors on Monster Hunter for good. Then, Monster Hunter World came out and completely kicked those doors in. Released on the 8th generation of consoles, World was a sight to behold. The beefier hardware gave the developers more freedom than ever before to pursue their ambitions and elevate the series to new heights, ushering in the glorious era of open-world Monster Hunter at last. Well, okay, no, not exactly. The game was still segmented between hub areas and distinct hunting biomes, but goddamn, those biomes were finally seamless, sprawling, and continuous levels free of loading screens. Hallelujah. Now tracking a monster through the overgrown thicket, down dank caverns, and up spiraling prehistoric treetops in the ancient forest, while critters of all shapes and sizes scurried away in the underbrush, served as the immersive, uninterrupted preamble for the desperate life-or-death clash that would follow when you finally had the beast in your sights and he had you in his. No longer were you fighting these magnificent titans in isolated stages, dreading that inevitable moment they decide to hightail it out of there, bringing the action to a screeching halt, forcing you to begin the tedious process of tracking them down. No, now these epic clashes could freely spill over to any and all parts of the map, and chasing a fleeing monster was no longer an irritating test of patience, but more of a thrilling sprint to finish off your wounded prey while they were on the back foot. Or vice versa, you could find yourself on the receiving end of an absolutely brutal thrashing, and be forced to make a panicked retreat, praying you could put enough distance between you and the irate beast to safely chug your last measly potion, lest you end up carted back to the nearest camp with your hard-fought spoils reduced. It was exhilarating. Monster Hunter World also gave the environments just as much of a starring role as the monsters. Each location was now a labyrinthine, multi-layered, and dense ecosystem that rewarded keen-eyed hunters with valuable resources, hidden secrets, strategic opportunities, and stunning vistas. The game truly made you feel like you were on a mythical safari, learning the lay of the land, observing and cataloging the various plants and animals, and carefully studying your target, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As a result, zones now felt more like organic natural spaces that flowed into one another, rather than disjointed boss arenas disguised as such, and each one was absolutely captivating to explore. Make no mistake though, as gorgeous and incredibly well realized as the environments were, the monsters still managed to steal the show every single time, thanks to some truly stunning animation work and AI that brought these creatures to life, grounding them in their environments with more believability than ever before. Honestly, I think I've spent just as much time in MH World following the monsters around their respective habitats, quietly observing their different behaviors as actually fighting them. Watching a great Jagras swallow some poor, helpless Abtanath whole, then awkwardly waddle its engorged body back through the forest and regurgitate the digested creature for its brood to feed on, before heading down to its subterranean nest for a power nap, never gets old or any less unsettling no matter how many times I've seen it. Neither does it get old seeing this big guy here, peacefully soaking up some rays while wistfully looking out over the horizon, giving the impression that there's more to him than his nickname of Belligerent Wyvern would suggest. Aww, almost makes you want to pet him. Nope. While World undoubtedly modernized the Monster Hunter formula, it remained unmistakably a Monster Hunter game through and through, preserving many of the franchise's trademarks, for better or worse. This meant you could still find yourself grappling with menu screens and tutorial pop-ups almost as frequently as you grappled with the monsters themselves, especially in the early hours of the game. Gathering, crafting, and item management continued to play significant roles in the moment-to-moment gameplay, albeit mercifully in a quicker, more streamlined way. Consequently, most weapons still featured complex button combos and required a degree of skill and patience to fully learn and exploit their unique styles and attack patterns. As for the plot and characters, although more prominent this time around, still served as little more than lighthearted embellishments to the main focus of the hunts. Moreover, the late game could still become excessively grindy at times, forcing you to hunt the same monster over and over in order to be able to craft the higher rank armor sets and weapons. Nevertheless, World successfully wove all these elements together more cohesively and eased newcomers into the experience more gradually than any previous title in the series, removing much of the initial friction of past games. I'm not gonna lie though, it still took me quite a while to come to grips with the game's more precise and weighty approach to weapon handling and to settle on one that felt right for me. Ironically, that one ended up being none other than the Charge Blade, one of the more technical weapons of the series. But being able to actually take my time to learn the ins and outs of the combat system in the comfort of my own home instead of looking over my shoulder at a Best Buy kiosk worked wonders. Who knew? Ultimately, it was the sheer delight of being immersed in this world that kept me coming back, if only for another opportunity to wander through its beautifully familiar yet alien landscapes filled with all kinds of magnificent and terrifying beasts. With the fifth mainline entry in its much-loved franchise, Capcom turned many gamers, myself included, who had long been unsure about whether the series was truly for them, into believers. They created a game so mesmerizing in its environments, so captivating in its visuals, so addictive in its gameplay, and so assured in its execution that its charm was hard to resist. It was one of those rare titles that lodged itself in your thoughts when you weren't playing, and kept you awake late into the night for just one more hunt when you were. Playing Monster Hunter World at the ripe old age of 30 reignited the same effervescent excitement in me that I felt at age 7 when I first watched a dinosaur majestically stride across the screen over 2 decades earlier in Jurassic Park. It was pure magic. Yet as fully realized as World seemed, there were still gameplay mechanics and concepts left on the cutting room floor, according to the game's director Yuya Tokuda, revealed during a GDC postmortem on the game, concepts he'd hoped to realize in future titles. For instance, the use of light was intended to have a greater impact on gameplay, requiring players to actively illuminate their surroundings while exploring caves and other dark environments. And while you can still make use of bright moss in the final game, it's not necessary for navigation, and I would have loved to have seen this implemented as originally conceived, as it creates a slightly creepier atmosphere with all these Jagras leering at you in the dark. You can also easily envision a monster designed around this mechanic, one that hides in the shadows to stalk and strike at you, forcing hunters to lure the beast into the light. Either way, I'd be curious to see if this idea returns in Wilds in some form. The footage also suggests that the environments may have been even larger than in the final release, and that at least one fan-favorite monster, Lagia Cruz, was tragically cut from the game due to the high cost and challenges associated with properly animating its elongated body throughout the more complex environments. But despite perhaps not quite being the complete vision its director intended, World, along with its only yet sizable expansion, Iceborne, was an impressive, feature-rich experience by all accounts, one that finally gave the series the global recognition it long deserved and brought in thousands of new fans into the fold. So where would the series go from here? What would a follow-up to one of Capcom's most successful and celebrated games of the past decade, nay, possibly of all time, look like? While Rise was an undoubtedly fun and endearing follow-up to World, even arguably as good, if not better than that game in some cases, that's right, I said it, and I regret nothing. However, for the true next-gen sequel to World, the Monster Hunter team was once again looking to greatly expand the series' horizons and take us into vast, uncharted lands, promising player freedom unlike anything we'd experienced before. The Wilds were calling. Monster Hunter is preparing to take another leap forward, perhaps the biggest leap it has ever taken. Wilds is both the culmination of 20 years of games and a new beginning for the franchise, one that's looking to shake up the formula in bold and ambitious new ways. But can it recapture the lightning in a bottle that made Worlds such a runaway hit? The broader gaming community is now better acquainted with the series, and players have collectively poured hundreds of thousands of hours into Worlds since its release, with the game still going strong. Can Wilds dethrone Worlds to become everybody's new obsession, or will its reign be short-lived? Well, if we look to the beta numbers as a reliable metric, it's probably safe to assume that Capcom has another monstrous hit on its hands come February 28th. Wilds is currently the most wishlisted game on Steam, overtaking the likes of Hollow Knight Silksong and Elden Ring Night Ring for the top spot. And based on the 40 plus hours I put into the betas, I'm confident in saying that Wilds is definitely going to dominate my attention for quite some time, because I'm already in awe of this game. And I say that only having played what amounts to an unpolished vertical slice of the full experience at this point. It's just that good. So let's talk about the big things first. Monster Hunter, after all, is a series that deals in all things big. Big weapons, big monsters, and even bigger battles. These games aren't exactly known for being subtle or understated, but why use a scalpel when you can wield a giant friggin' buzzsaw to tackle the problem and then transform that problem into an impressive pair of boots to show off to your friends? Well, if the previews and betas are any indication, Monster Hunter Wilds isn't going to tame the series' inclination for larger-than-life spectacle. This is made resoundingly clear the moment you seamlessly transition from the game's deliciously robust character creator into the opening cutscene. It's evident that Capcom has once again poured all their zenny into this production, fitting for what is now solidly one of their flagship franchises with a global audience. Everything here, from the stunning character models to the elaborate cutscenes and grand orchestral score, to the spectacle of this opening tutorial sequence, showcases their confidence in this series as it boldly thunders into its 6th generation. They've truly spared no expense, and it shows in every frame. Likewise, the show-stopping, jaw-dropping, butt-clapping clashes against those magnificent living mountains of scales, fur, jaws, wings, and bad attitudes who are the monsters themselves are, as one might expect, epic in every sense of the word. Even in the beta, with its less than smooth performance, noticeable absence of that oh-so-crunchy hit-stop effect, occasional bugginess, and other missing features, brandishing your favorite oversized maiming tool, or in this case, tools, against those pesky beasties has never looked or felt better. I mean, just look at my beautiful charge blade. Marvel at its intricate craftsmanship, how the blade catches the light just right, and the effortless elegance with which sword and shield come together to form a glorious spinning implement of carnage. It almost makes me want to weep. Okay, but seriously, the level of detail put into just the starting weapons and armor sets alone borders on the obsessive. I mean, look at how beautiful these things look. To the point that if all the gear looks this good, I'm going to lose some serious sleep just deciding what to wear. But I digress. It really can't be overstated how much of a game changer it is being able to bring 2 weapons with you on hunts, a first for the series, which is really like 3 if you favor one of the Switch weapons. Oh, we're eating good, Charge Bladers, we're eating good. This opens up so many new tactical possibilities and on-the-fly strategies while you're in the thick of it. Not to mention that having a ranged option at the ready to better deal with the airborne monsters is a godsend for those of us who prefer to main the heftier melee tools in the arsenal. I can't even imagine the amount of playtesting and balancing they've had to do and will probably continue to do post-launch to get this just right. Either way, it'll be fun to see what weapon pairings people end up gravitating toward. As for me, I've already decided it's my one and only beauty plus either the bow or light bowgun for the win. But refocusing on the stars of the show, the monsters have undergone an incredible glow up yet again, and have never looked or sounded better. With newcomers like Puke Puke's buff amphibian cousin Chotacabra flaunting its sticky prehensile tongue, alongside the temperamental Doshaguma whom I've affectionately dubbed Pitbull Bears with their mounds of shaggy fur and large slobbering jaws, to the coiling, twisting serpentine diggers that could give Kevin Bacon PTSD, the Balahara, and the Windward Plains' majestic top dog, or in this case Lightning Wyvern Ray Dao, with his electrifying personality, all the way to Wilds' absolutely savage and mysterious new flagship monster, Arkveld, who's quickly crushed any doubts about Wilds potentially being too easy for those of us who've tangled with him in the beta. These awe-inspiring creatures are more majestic than ever, featuring even more complex behaviors and pack dynamics that make them seem incredibly lifelike. Maybe even a little too lifelike? As their expressive wounded animations and distressed cries made me feel particularly bad about taking their lives this time around, and I can easily see PETA having something to say about this. Who's the real monster? Nevertheless, a hunter must hunt, and the never-ending struggle between man and giant elemental beast remains the name of the game in Wilds, with these titanic clashes now taking place over greater distances, across more varied terrain and shifting climate conditions, giving hunters even more to consider when engaging these behemoths. Wilds basically amps everything up to an 11 during its marquee hunts, especially against the larger threats, and keeps it there, inundating every pixel of screen real estate with a dazzling display of pyrotechnics as you trade blows with these enraged bruisers who aren't shy about going nuclear if it'll get you off their backs. Yikes. It's not a stretch to say that I probably got carded more than a few times while playing the beta, simply because I was too transfixed by the beautifully rendered chaos unfolding before my eyes to remember to dodge out of the way of a life-threatening attack. Turf Wars are also back, and still a spectacle, what else is there to say? Watching Pitbull Bear get swarmed by a pack of these raptor guys gave me serious flashbacks to JP's climactic museum showdown. Then there's this moment where Ray Dao tries to establish his dominance and show Arkveld who the real top dog of the plains is, only to get leashed and put into a corner himself instead. And last but not least, this moment right here where a lone Gypsros decided it was a good idea for some reason to charge headfirst into a pack of Doshaguma, apparently tired of living, I guess. Yet as incredibly thrilling, jaw-dropping even, as it is to see the series bring its grand spectacle and bombastic monster scraps to life for the current souped-up generation of 4K consoles. It was also the quieter moments and other subtle details scattered throughout the beta that have me beyond excited at the thought of getting lost in these uncharted wilds once the full release arrives. Indeed, riding into the arid expanse of the Windward Plains astride the immediately lovable yet regal Sacred, it's clear that Tokuda-san and his team are once again harnessing the capabilities of the latest generation to create living, breathing ecosystems that are larger and more dynamic than anything the series has ever seen, with roaming monster herds now consisting of dozens of individuals who will behave differently based on their proximity to the alpha, according to the devs. Undoubtedly, one of the more captivating moments was just observing these Karatnoth flocking in such large herds and adjusting their behaviors based on the situation, time of day, and changing climate conditions, much like real animals. From peacefully grazing with all these tiny cleaner birds perched atop their scaly backs during the temperate weather of the plenty, to more actively foraging during the dustier, less bountiful fallow, and huddling together around the alpha to weather the deadly lightning and biting sandstorms of the region's inclemency known as the Sand Tide. It's truly impressive to witness the amount of work and care invested in making this world's inhabitants feel that much more alive and responsive to their environments. This applies to all the monsters, endemic life, and people. The attention to detail is just staggering, and traversing through the Windward Plains, I felt as if I was in the middle of an alien version of a Planet Earth documentary, almost able to imagine the dulcet tones of Sir David Attenborough chiming in at any moment to narrate the scene before me. It's incredible how far the medium has come in the span of 20 years, but here we are. Oh, and speaking of the locals, well, the human ones anyway, another one of those memorable moments occurred when I spotted a sacred rider in the distance, escorting what appeared to be 3 women carrying large ceramic urns toward a nearby riverbank. I carefully approached and observed them, then followed as they walked away, fully expecting them to despawn after a certain distance. To my delight, they actually led me all the way to their settlement of Windsong, home of the Sand Peoples of the region to whom the brother and sister duo we helped save in the opening sequence belonged to. After wandering up and down this dusty, hidden desert village, admiring the local architecture, watching the villagers go about their daily lives, and soaking in these soothing sounds of the hundreds of dangling fulgurite wind chimes placed all around, a protective measure the village adopted to ward off aggressive monsters by emitting the same sounds as the region's apex, I was once again struck by the realization of how incredibly alive and dynamic the world feels compared to previous titles. Monster Hunter has always featured vibrant hub towns filled with colorful characters, but they've seldom felt like more than stationary or walking quest boards merely existing to direct the player to their next task. That's not the feeling I got here, as the villagers of Kunafa continued their quotidian routines despite my presence. That's not to suggest we won't be asked to undertake a few hunts and other ancillary quests for these guys in the full game. We more than likely will. But I can more easily imagine this place and its people existing independently of my involvement. I genuinely want to learn more about their lives, customs, and histories. Not a statement I'd ever thought I'd make about NPCs in a Monster Hunter game, but it's becoming clear that Wilds is attempting to break new ground by focusing more on its human characters and world building this time around. This is also evidenced by the fact that our character is no longer a silent protagonist. Hopefully, our interactions with the Sand Peoples of Windsong will go deeper than just running errands in the full release. Anyway, after sufficiently satiating my curiosity about these seemingly peaceful desert folk, I decided to head back out into the wilds as dusk began to fall and the sand tide rolled in, curious about what other discoveries awaited us amongst the shifting dunes. I have to say that having the climate play such an active role in changing not only the regional ecology, but also the look and feel of the environments and the way hunts play out, along with possibly impacting other aspects of the world as well, is such a fantastic idea to bring back to the series after Monster Hunter DOS flirted with the concept. Plus, just witnessing the imposing clouds of the sand tide ominously encroaching from the horizon before eventually overtaking everything like a great dark tidal wave is an incredible effect that is as mesmerizing as it is terrifying. Overall, I likely spent more than half of my time with the betas just simply exploring and absorbing as much of the world as I could. From the rolling dunes to cavernous limestone caves and back to the open plains, I'm once again captivated by the dynamic world Capcom has created here, complete with its topographical diversity, dynamic ecosystems, and shifting climate. And this is all just part of the starting area, mind you. Other locations like the Scarlet Forest, Oilwell Basin, and recently revealed Ice Shard Cliffs are looking just as rich, complex, and visually stunning. Wilds seems to be genuinely delivering on something that the series has been building towards arguably since the first game. A vast, living world where everything is interconnected. You experience it firsthand during actual gameplay rather than through a cutscene. Monsters and humans coexisting, negotiating the same beautiful yet often hostile environments, fighting for survival, and being impacted by changing climates. It's all incredible to see play out before you in real time. The fact that main camps and other settlements now too exist within the same explorable map instead of being relegated to separate hub areas, along with our ability to move seamlessly between biomes without loading screens, is a dream come true for those of us who have longed for a true open-world Monster Hunter experience after getting a taste of it in Monster Hunter World. And while the devs are reluctant to call Wilds a true open world, based on what we've seen so far, the game appears set to dwarf every previous entry to date, and I for one plan to leave no stone unturned and no dung unscraped. Still, I expect that most people's raison d'etre for embarking on this new adventure will be the same as in every other Monster Hunter game that came before it: the titular hunts. And I'd be lying if I said they weren't mine, because they truly are bangers. But I get a sense that with Wilds, Tokuda-san and his team are encouraging us to spend a bit less time with our weapons drawn and perhaps a little more time appreciating the beauty of its living landscapes, admiring the wondrous creatures inhabiting them, and contemplating the role humans play in maintaining the delicate balance of it all. Whether Wilds' overall plot ends up being more compelling than in previous entries, or dares to explore themes that the series has traditionally painted with the broadest of strokes in more granular detail remains to be seen. As previously mentioned, and I don't think many fans would disagree, Monster Hunter as a series hasn't really concerned itself with narrative depth, focusing primarily on its reliable gameplay loop of hunting and crafting to carry the experience, with the story in each game serving as little more than flavor text to get you out the door and into the next big fight. And while I certainly don't expect the series to suddenly transform into Final Fantasy, Horizon, or The Witcher, even though all three had cameos in World, I wouldn't be upset if Wilds' story dipped its talents just a bit deeper into the narrative pool, providing us with a more compelling drama and engaging cast of characters to invest in. I mean, with a main cast that already looks this good, they have us halfway there. Now we just need some solid writing to bring it all together. I have faith in you, Capcom. I have faith in you. With the release of Monster Hunter World, Yuya Tokuda aimed to recapture the emotions he felt when watching the trailer for the very first Monster Hunter while he was still just a student. He wanted to create a game where monsters convincingly existed as part of larger ecosystems, and where the environments themselves played a more significant role in the moment-to-moment gameplay, fully immersing players in the hunter fantasy. And while he expressed great pride in what they achieved with World, there were still concepts that remained underutilized or completely unused that he'd hoped to include in future titles. He also wanted to further explore themes the series had always alluded to, such as the complex relationships between humans and the environment in greater detail. Well, after experiencing a brief slice of Wilds, I have a strong feeling this may be that game. The one that fully realizes Tokuda-san's ambitions, which date back over 2 decades to when he first laid eyes on the game that started it all. With Wilds, Monster Hunter may be coming full circle, much like nature itself.
So tasty!